All right, so hello. So I am Kevin Pugh,
And I'm Cassie Bergstrom.
and we are both faculty in the educational psychology program at the University of Northern Colorado. We are doing a series of motivation vlogs. Why are we doing this, Cassie?
Yes, so we are we're doing this mainly because we want to share some information and kind of discuss some current findings and some questions surrounding different perspectives of motivation. Additionally, we're both also teaching a motivation and education course online this semester, and we thought this would be a nice way to reach our students so they can see our faces.
Yes. And so in these vlogs, what we're going to do is we'll talk about a particular motivational theory or perspective, and we'll have some structure to this, maybe. That will kind of start out with a story of motivation that relates to what we're going to talk about. And then we'll talk about some of the research and ideas, some of the interesting ideas and research related to the theory. And then we'll talk about questions that often come up in our course related to the theory and what some of our thoughts are about those questions. So before we
And
get
it,
started,
yes, go for it.
we thought it'd be fun to have virtual backgrounds. So instead of you seeing down in our basements, uh, you can see some spot and you could try to guess where we are coming from. So yeah, let me lean over so you can see. Look, there's a little lake there.
Oh, the lake is
Come out
nice.
for some scale. This is my friend here. Can barely show up. So
Can
at the
scale.
end of our vlog, we'll let you know where each of our uh, backgrounds are coming from.
Where we are.
Where we are, yes,
Yes.
where we are broadcasting from. Um, so, all right, a story. First, I have a video to share. So, um, here's a video, and this is two of my kids. And here they are at the climbing gym, going along, doing a climb. And this is a partner climb. So you can only do it with a partner because you need someone to swing you over. And ta-da, that's it. They did the climb. So uh, I share this for a couple reasons. One is because uh, they weren't always able to climb together like this, and it has to do with goal orientations. That there was a period where they could not climb together, and um, and the other reason is because these two have such different goal orientations, and so it can kind of give good examples for talking about these different goal orientations. So this one here, so my daughter, this is Sierra. Um, so she has uh, really strong mastery goal orientation and performance goal orientation. So that means, so mastery is like she really enjoys learning and improving and developing her skills at things. And that's this mastery goal orientation thing. Um, On the other hand, she also has really strong performance goal orientations, which means she's really aware of other people, what they're thinking, what their perceptions of her might be, how she's doing relative to other people. Um, and um, that combination leads to some interesting outcomes. And I suppose I can go back to us. And so um, these goals, being high in mastery and high in performance, both approach in the sense of wanting to be the best and wanting to look good relative to others, and performance avoidance, which means she stresses a lot about looking incompetent or not looking the best and what other people would think of her and that. And so she's high across all these things. Um, and in some ways that's great. So like in school, Lisa would be really high achieving. So she was valedictorian in high school. Um, she did a combined um, master's and undergrad degree. And so she got her master's in statistics at like 21 or 22 or something pretty young. Now she's in a PhD statistics program doing really well. So it all seems great, right? Well, but it's not so simple, that there's this other side to it where she deals with so much anxiety. And it's because of this performance avoidance characteristic. So fear of failure is this huge thing. And all the time she's telling me, oh, I'm going to drop out of this PhD program because I just can't do it, um, and even during high school, she was often, highly stressed about these things. Um, and this is that side of the performance avoidance. So back to this climbing. So when she was in, so this would have been probably middle school, and she was quite a good climber. We'd go to the gym every so often, and she's better than most of the kids, and enjoyed it. This was a good thing until her younger brother comes along and is this little climbing phenom, and starts climbing everything, and then it killed the whole thing for her, because now she would compare herself so much to him that she just couldn't enjoy it. And it was more than that. There was also, she has this hypermobility, so she'd had all this joint pain, and that joint pain obviously makes climbing not as fun. So it's kind of the combination of things. But she ended up totally disengaging from climbing for a number of years. And it wasn't until she went off to college and was on her own again, then she started going to the climbing gym and got back into it. Now they climb together all the time and have a great time. And she still has these, performance things, but she deals with it better. It's not so overwhelming. Also with climbing now, it's like my son, so Hayden, he's just so good that like both of us are just like, whatever, just show us how to do it, some of these things. And so it's not so much of a competition anymore in that. And so she's kind of an example of the interplay of this mastery, performance, and both performance approach and avoid. And then my son Hayden, he's kind of the opposite. He is like all mastery, no performance in that sense, so he also really loves learning things and developing his skill, but he could kind of care less about what anybody else thinks or about any of these performance standards, which again, normally, initially you think, oh, that sounds great too, and it is great in context like climbing. He can just enjoy it and loves it, and there's no stress or worries. But in education, there's sometimes some problem. Like we were really worried if he was even going to graduate high school. And the reason why is because like in the classes that he liked and he saw the value in the content, he would do really well and focus. And same with if he liked the teacher and respected the teacher and had kind of relationship, then he would do well in that. But otherwise, if he didn't see the value of the class, like the personal value, you just wouldn't do anything. And it's like he needed this chemistry class to graduate high school, and we were like all stressed, like, is he actually going to pass it? Because he just wouldn't do thing, in this, what he did with, some of his other classes and that, where he just wouldn't hardly turn anything in. And so luckily, he passed high school, he made it to college, and he's gotten better over time. So he should graduate end of this semester, and he's gotten better at now when the class, even when he doesn't see the point of an assignment or thing, to still do it. He's not, sometimes he still doesn't fully follow through on things, but better than like his freshman year some of the class, you just wouldn't turn in assignments because it's like, it just seems dumb to me. It's like, no, like you need to pay attention to some of these performance as grades matter, and so that's kind of an introduction to goal oriented. So goal theory, achievement goal theory, is one of the prominent theories of motivation, and it's all about trying to identify the kinds of goals that we bring to a situation and how those goals then influence our subsequent motivation and learning and so on. And as you can see from the examples of my two kids, that it's kind of complex. They aren't mutually exclusive. So you can have both mastery and performance kind of goals, or you can be like my son and be all mastery, no performance. You also have, it's common to have kids that are all performance and no mastery. Like all they care about is their how they're doing relative to others, or their perception of competence, or just their grades and things like that. So that's an overview of the whole theory. We thought we'd talk about some of the research related to different ideas and issues within the theory. And so, Cassie, what does the research say about these performance approach and performance avoid goals? Most people, sort of intuitively understand that like a mastery goal is kind of a good thing. I mean, to
Yeah.
have a focus on wanting to learn and improve, and unsurprisingly, that's related to positive outcomes, but it's kind of complex, and the results related to performance goals is somewhat complex too. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, definitely. So when we look at performance goals, the big thing that defines a performance goal is that someone is concerned about how they are performing either in comparison to others, or they're concerned about, for example, how their teacher sees them, and how their teacher perceives their performance basically. And there's mixed research on performance approach goals. So performance approach goals is basically when we're setting goals to show either ourselves or other people that we are smart, to prove our smartness basically, to others. Performance avoid goals are when we're setting up conditions so that we avoid not looking smart, or we avoid looking dumb or incompetent. And we know that those goals, performance avoid goals, are not positive, not beneficial at all. We don't see good things out of performance avoid goals. But with performance approach goals, the research is more mixed. We know that they do predict things like grades, so which makes some sense. There's a lot of performance elements in grading systems, and so if we hold goals that that are more in line with that system, then it makes sense that we would get probably better grades. There's a fair amount of debate though, and the research is still kind of out on whether they predict deep learning, and how, kind of whether they predict engagement with the topic, and sustained engagement over time as well. So there's kind of research on both sides, that would suggest that performance goals may predict engagement, but they may not. So it's a little bit less clear in that way. We do know that when we start taking on performance goals, either approach or avoid, there's some potential side effects. And so one of them is anxiety, essentially. If we are focusing on performance, whether we're focusing on showing others that we're smart or avoiding showing others that we are not smart, there's an anxiety element to that. That increases the stress that we feel because we're doing this comparison, this social comparison. Additionally, we know that there's a pretty high chance that if we have a performance approach goal, and let's say things are going pretty well, if something happens and we fail, or if we have a more challenging environment that we don't feel like we can succeed at, there's a harm that performance approach goal will turn into a performance avoid goal. So, if we have failure and we come back after that failure, and we just say, I'm just not going to try in this area as much anymore, or I'm going to, try to do things to avoid looking not smart. We know that that's a risk that performance goals carry.
Well, that was
Um,
exactly my daughter in
yeah,
middle school with the climbing, where, when she was, one of the best among the kids, then, and have
all
this
was good.
performance approach
Mhm.
orientation. Yeah, on the climbing team, gonna be, you know, top climber and that. And then when little brother comes along um, and joints are causing pain, make it harder to climb as much, and not the best, of all the kids anymore. Then it kind of switched from performance approach to performance avoid, and
Yeah,
led to disengagement. But a
and
lot of
it's
times, kids in school, they don't have, they can't choose to engage in something else. And
that's exactly what I was gonna say. Yeah.
oh yeah, go ahead. So
No, but I think it's true because she could choose whether to do climbing or not. But if you're in that situation and it's a school environment, if you're in third grade, you can't choose to go to school or not.
exactly.
That's a requirement. And so I think that provides a more difficult. It makes performance goals trickier to utilize well over time in school, I would say. But at the same time, we know that performance goals, we know that, for example, graduate students often hold pretty high performance goals in addition to mastery goals, or
Mhm.
else you probably wouldn't be in graduate programs. So that there is, to some extent, a degree of success in school and more formal environments like work environments where performance goals can be important. But it's kind of how we couple them with other types of goals as well.
And I should point out that that switch from approach to avoidance, that sometimes takes place with transitions, and that,
Mm,
so like going from, like we see it at the university, where some students, they were top of their class in high school, and then they go
hmm
to college and suddenly everyone was top of their class, more or less, or something. And and if they had really high performance approach goals in high school, that can switch to performance avoidance when they aren't the best and they struggle, or
hmm
they experience their first failure in college. um, and so that, again, can be one of those side effects of a performance goal,
Yeah.
especially
So
if
kind
it's,
of,
oh, go ahead.
oh, did you have something else to add for this piece?
No, as you can say, especially if it's not balanced with other stuff, like a mastery goal and some of the other motivational kinds of patterns that we'll talk about in other vlogs, a sense of efficacy and some of those things. So, all
Yep.
right,
No,
go
I
ahead.
was just, I was just gonna ask, kind of along this line. So, with this risk that we're talking about, should we promote performance orientation at all? Is that even something that we should be encouraging?
Yeah, so this is a good question, because as you mentioned, we do see some positive outcomes associated with a performance approach
Hmm
goal, and in some cases, when students don't have any performance orientation at all, then, like my son sometimes, that can be problematic. So should we focus on that and that? Um and my general answer is not really, and here's why. um that already there's a lot of performance elements to the school environment. It's not like we have to go out of our way to try to create a performance environment. It's already there,
hmm
in almost all schools, and that's because there's already a system where there's grades. um, there's often a lot of, sort of public recognition, and that kids are already making comparisons and are aware of how they're doing relative to others, especially as they hit adolescence, and that is just part of our nature. We do this a lot. um, so we don't need to worry about, oh, there's no performance environment there. Now, some kids like my son might choose to ignore all that. But I think the answer, instead of creating more of a performance environment, is, talk with them individually. And this is what we do with my son, and, try to talk through and help them understand, like, okay, look, I know you don't see the point in chemistry, And I know you know you don't think this is a great teacher and that, but let's talk about why this matters to your future. You know, and try to help them see that, you know, like just there's just plain utility value in passing this class. um and uh you know, so that was at least enough to get him through and along. um and um and there's another piece to this. So you might think about like, yeah, but if we create a strong performance environment, that really might motivate some kids to just work harder in that. um but one of the problems is we can't create just a performance approach environment without also creating a performance avoidance environment. Or
Mhm,
put another way, all we can do is create a performance environment.
mhm,
And students orient either approach or avoid. But the things that create a performance are things like, you know, social comparison, public evaluation, and that sort of stuff. Those are just general performance environment stuff. And so there's no way I can create and foster a performance approach orientation without also fostering performance avoidance orientations in other students.
mhm.
And so that's one of the reasons why we kind of have to be careful about that. And so generally goal theorists are going to say, you know, like, you know, put your efforts into creating, fostering the mastery orientation sort of stuff.
And the performance is already there to some, the encouragement for that performance is already there to some extent.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So,
Yep.
Cassie, could you talk to us some about self-handicapping? Because that's a big part of this theory too.
Yeah, so self-handicapping is often when we're talking about the performance side. We don't typically see self-handicapping when we're talking about the mastery side of goals. But so what self-handicapping is basically when someone looks at a goal that they might have and feels like they themselves, if they fail at that goal, it will, cause kind of damage their self-esteem. It will change the way that they see themselves. So what happens is sometimes people kind of intentionally sabotage themselves and set up a condition so that if they fail, there's a reason why they failed that they can blame for that failure. But if they succeed, they overcome that obstacle, then that makes them feel, kind of even better. So one example that I found as I was kind of reading through different things. A non-academic example was that of a chess master, Alexander de Chapelles. He was in early 1800s in France, and he was an excellent chess player, and he was considered at the time to be one of the world's greatest at chess. But he started feeling really insecure in his ability to play chess. So what he would do is he wouldn't agree to a chess match unless his opponent agreed that he could start that he, Alexander, could start with one less pawn. So he was basically taking that away. And what would happen then is it made him feel really good if he actually won it. Then he said, oh, I won that, by taking away my pawn or giving you an extra move. But if he lost, then there was a reason that he could explain his failure. He could explain his failure in this way. So that's one example from the chess world. We can see it in others, we see it in athletes and musicians sometimes doing things to kind of self-sabotage their performance.
It's often a
Kevin
theme
found some
in like,
examples in movies.
yeah, it's often a theme in like movies or books and TV shows too. And so you know, a couple that come to mind um that might be example this, you know, one might be like Thor. So in Thor in, is
I'm
it
not sure which
Endgame?
one.
I don't know, one of the movies where you know, firstly he's had a failure experience. And um so what does he decide? Well, instead of, you know, trying again and potentially failing, it's better to just not try. You know, which was this clear performance avoidance orientation, that because you're so worried about not succeeding, about demonstrating incompetence in that you decide it's less risky to just not try. And so what does he do? He decides to become a loser, grow a beer belly, disengage in that sense for a while. Um, Also like Luke Skywalker from one of those movies where he, um, fails in teaching Han and Leia's son, Kylo Ren, to become a Jedi. Kylo Ren turns to the dark side. So what does Luke decide? Well, it's better, instead of to try and possibly fail again, I guess going to run off to some island on some hidden planet and totally disengage. And this is that, you know, performance avoidance thing. And we see this with students too, right? Well,
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, when you look at goal theory, we tried to come up with examples outside of classrooms, but you really do see it in classrooms a lot. And maybe, looking back at your own environment, may have done it yourself at some point in time. So for
probably all
example,
have.
man, we all have exactly. If you have this test coming up, or maybe it's in a class that you're not really enjoying, and you go, instead of spending the time to study, or trying to figure out this information, maybe we purposely don't study, or we go out the night before a test, so that if we don't do well on the test, we have some other reason or some other explanation for that failure. Essentially, maybe we purposely don't try. Sometimes, particularly among high school students, we might see that they're bragging about not studying, and so for that, it kind of brings in that social goal element as well, wanting to fit in with a group of people. But it might also be related to self-handicapping as well, doing something so that if I don't succeed, then I have something to kind of not to protect my self-esteem, essentially, so that I don't have to feel like, I'm a worthless person because I failed. I have a reason for my failure. But still not super helpful when we're looking at the goal being learning. and,
Yes.
um,
That
and
reminds me of something I saw on the internet. It was like, someone posted on Facebook or something like, I'm so going to fail this test. I haven't studied at all. And then the
yeah,
reply was, dude, I literally see you 5 feet away studying for your test, something like that, And where we often do this, try to set up the appearance of, oh, I didn't even study for this, so that we can then not look so bad if we don't do so well. But that's
yeah.
at least those students are still studying and that. But where we really see self-handicapping is we see students get so anxious about this that they
Mhm.
decide it is better to actually not study and deliberately do bad on the test than to study and try and fail. Because if I try and fail, that is so much worse. That's a blow to my sense of worth and ability
Yeah.
than if I purposely don't try. Which reminds me, I swear there's got to be other movies like will deal with the same thing, but like with relationships, where it's like they decide to sabotage the relationship when it's getting too good
Mhm.
because they're afraid it can't last, and it's better to sabotage it from the beginning than to wait and have it be sabotaged by somebody else or for it to fall apart. That's
The
all
other
this
person.
self-handicapping thing. You undermine your own performance. Um,
I'm
and
sure there's more romantic comedies that fit this
I'm sure,
than we're
yeah,
able to come up with, but
yes,
so brainstorm there and let us know if you come up with some.
yes.
we'll add it in for examples in the future. So we have some kind of common questions or issues that we thought it would be kind of helpful to talk through, and these are things that we've heard come up in our classes before around these ideas. So Kevin, one of the questions that often comes up is competition good or bad? It seems to produce so much excellence in things like sports, but bottom line, is competition good or bad?
Yes. So, really good question that our students often ask. And um, yes, competition often does lead to some level of excellence. even a really high level of excellence. Um, and in that sense, we see like, wow, like it really is this good thing. And you can see the alignment between competition and performance and
Hmm.
kind of goal orientation, that a competitive environment is all about how you're doing relative to others. So it places this emphasis on your demonstration of competence and your performance relative to others. And that really does drive performance in areas like sports and other areas. So is it appropriate for education? Will it drive performance in education too? Um, and the problem is that the education is a very different environment than something like sports. And we mentioned this before, but in sports, um, it's your choice to engage in it, and you can choose to disengage, and that's okay. And if say you have this performance orientation, and you're not the best at sports, and it leads you to disengage, then that's okay. I mean, there's lots of other activities. It's not the end of the world, but kids don't have that choice when it comes to education. That if we create a competitive environment, um, then you will see that it often will be motivating to some students, that those students, particularly those students who are at the top and have this chance of winning, that they will be motivated and might work extra hard to succeed at that. But the problem is there'll be an equal amount of demotivation for students who aren't the winners. That competition, especially in the education setting, is very demotivating for the losers.
Hmm.
Partly because they can't just choose to disengage, and partly because none of us enjoy losing that much. But it tends to be, I don't know, get somewhat fixed in that, and so overall, is goal theorists really discourage competition in education for those reasons, because of the negative consequences that way.
And to add one other thing, I think that, there's some individual differences that are correlated with whether competition is going to be, beneficial or not. We know that in general, and of course this isn't true with every individual, but in general, we find that that girls tend to be less encouraged by competition than boys. And we also know that students coming from ethnic minority groups often are not encouraged by individual competition and are sometimes really put off by individual competition. And so again, if we're in an environment that we're not choosing, like school, we're setting up different conditions for success for those individuals.
Yep,
So that can be an issue as well.
exactly. Yeah. um if you have sort of like group competition, that's better.
Hmm.
It's not as problematic. um and but again, you have to do it smartly. So if it's fixed groups, like in the Harry Potter movies and books, where you have the houses, and
Hmm.
you have these fixed group and they compete against each other for points, well, that might motivate the groups to maybe work harder, get more points than they would otherwise, somewhat. But one of the downsides, I mean, this is a great way to create animosity between students. So, I love Dumbledore, but this maybe wasn't one of Dumbledore's best ideas,
One
is
of the,
have these fixed houses, and, like, if you want to sit down, like, okay, how could we get different students to really develop animosity between each other? Well, let's create these houses. Um,
have this very obvious competition.
yes, yes, with rewards and things. Yeah.
That public comparison, yes.
Yes. But in like your classroom, what you can do is have competitive groups, but not have them be fixed. By I mean, have them, so it'll be different students each time. When students work together in a group, this is sort of this cooperative, competitive environment, then they do develop more of a sense of belonging and relationship with the students in their group. And if you then mix them up and things like that, it's not going to create as much of this animosity. And it's more, you can set the groups up so that each group has sort of an equal opportunity to succeed. And that takes away this element of, oh, it's motivating for those who have a chance to win and really demotivating for those who know they're going to be the losers. Um, but overall, goal theorists would say, be careful about how you use any competition. If you do, make sure it's this cooperative, competitive kind of structure. But overall, focus a lot more on these cooperative structures. That aligns more with developing a mastery goal orientation.
And other motivational constructs as well. We tend to see a lot of benefits with cooperative learning.
Yep. So Cassie, another question we get has to do with assessment and grading. So the questions go, well, so if master goals are important and that's what's often missing in the education environment, should we grade differently? Should grades be based on individual improvement as opposed to how we normally grade? Or is it okay to grade based on how students do relative to each other, or in terms of achieving certain standards? Like, how should we grade, or should we do away with grades altogether? So what are your thoughts on this?
Great question. And my thoughts are, and the research is mixed. I think that this is still an area that's really up for debate among educational researchers. I think that, the question comes up, would a gradeless system work? I think that it has been tried. There are areas that have tried gradeless systems, and they're still kind of working through that. In terms of goal orientation researchers, I think they would say that grading on personal improvement would be an improvement over standards-based grading, which kind of goes against some of the current the current environment in schools and grading. And I think that that's still an area that's being developed and more researched in that area, in that way. So this idea of, could we do away with grades entirely? I think that would be tricky based on our current system. I do think that some of the takeaway, though, is to make sure that we're not grading based on comparisons between students. If we're trying, like the typical idea of grading on a curve where you have one person's score that sets a grading system, is not beneficial and not helpful. That's definitely encouraging more competition and more performance. And in that way, probably isn't good. But I think that the movement towards looking at grading more based on personal improvement is there, and there's definitely some researchers who advocate that. But the comparison to others is really not a beneficial way to grade, and so we definitely would discourage that point.
Yeah, and I think this is tricky. I was just trying to think about my own grading practices and that, and there are a few cases where I do where the grades are based more on their improvement, like here's where they started and that. But mostly, I think I do it on, here's a certain standard, and try to make that clear and meaningful. And if they achieve that standard, they get the grade, regardless of how anybody else in the class is doing.
And that's kind of how mastery focused things work. You have this set skill or this set goal that you need. If you're mastering it, you're reaching that, and then you can move on to additional, kind of other material. So that is more standards based. I agree. But there's still a lot of debate on this issue across all areas.
And you can certainly see situations where students are coming in at really different levels in that. And it really makes sense to, okay, let's start with where you are, and grade you on the progress that you make from where you're starting with, or come up with standards relative to where they are, and
kind of individual standard, which IEPs are good examples of that.
Yes.
Where they create individualized goals to meet. But I don't think we do that as much across the board as might be beneficial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
kind of wrapping this up then, so what are best practices? What messages should teachers take from goal theory?
So Carol Ames, one of the founders of goal theory, um, she came up with what she called the target model. And
Mhm,
target is an acronym that stands for task, authority, recognition, grouping, evaluation, and time.
mhm,
And came up with each of those things ways you could do them more in a mastery way or a performance way that overall creates more of a mastery environment or a performance environment. So maybe we can go through that. So I'll start with the
yep.
first one. So T stands for task, and then which might be the most important one. So well, what they found is that for students to adopt a mastery goal orientation, it's really important that you have meaningful, authentic tasks for them to do. If they perceive a lot of the work as just busy work or pointless, um, then it's really hard to have a mastery goal orientation, because they need to. I mean, if your focus is going to be learning and improving, you need to see that what you're doing is worthwhile in some
Mhm.
way. And so that those tasks matter. Um, so A.
And A, so thank you. A is authority. So it's this idea of looking at kind of how much who holds authority in the classroom. Do students have an opportunity to develop autonomy and agency so that they are exploring things, not just the teacher's ideas, and then the teacher isn't kind of holding primary own sole authority over students, because we know that if students have a higher chance of developing autonomy, that's more related to mastery goals as well. And so that would the authority, the A there, looks at how we navigate that element of authority in classrooms. All right, to R.
R for recognition. So um, for a mastery environment, recognition should really be more personal and private.
Mhm,
Um, and if it's more comparative and public, that creates more of a performance goal environment.
mhm,
Oh, and I have another story related to this. So let's see, last year, so my youngest daughter, she'd been in third grade. She has a best friend, and they like almost all the same things. They just whatever one likes, the other likes. So I was like really surprised when her friends over her house one day, and she mentioned something about how she hated reading. And I was like, wait, what? Because my daughter loves reading. She just she just reads all the time and makes me read to her all the time. Loves it, favorite thing. So it's like, wait, how are they have something different? Kids are different. It might just be um, some difference. But then later I find out because my wife would volunteer in the classroom regularly, and she mentioned that the teacher had the reading chart posted up on the wall. So this chart of reading levels, little stars or X's or something, publicly displayed on the wall, showing where the kids were. And so my daughter's friend was didn't have many smiley faces or whatever the markers were. So there was this public display of you are a poor reader. you know and um that uh that sort of public recognition, um model, is the sort of thing that can be very demotivating.
mhm,
And so Elise sort of think of herself as not a reader, or engage in this sort of self-handicapping thing. Oh, instead of being, thinking and identifying as a poor reader, it's better to identify as a non-reader. I hate
mhm,
reading. Reading's no fun, um, and all that. And these things become self-fulfilling prophecies too. It's like, um, might, initially not do well, and then you identify, as, ooh, I'm a non-reader, I don't want to do this, and so then you don't, and then your performance then struggles, as we see, this is part of that performance avoidance, that has these negative impacts on learning and skill development. And so, luckily, so I mentioned this to my wife when she explained about this reading chart, and she kindly talked to the teacher about it, and to her credit, the teacher then took this down, changed her practice, so that wouldn't be a part. But it was kind of like, for my daughter's friend, that damage was already done. She already started identifying as in this self-handicapping way as a non-reader. It's something I'm into. I should follow up on that and see if it's changed now. And now that the environment's changed, new school year, and yeah. So anyway, that would be the recognition things. Make it more private and personal instead of public and comparative. So, all right.
Okay, so we are to G.
G, yes.
G, so G is for grouping. And we already spent a kind of a chunk of time talking about this as well. But we know that cooperative learning tends to be really good for mastery goals, particularly if we're having any element of competition. That grouping is a really crucial element of it. And grouping based, we don't need to get into ability-based grouping, but generally not super great when we're looking at motivation. And so, the grouping and paying attention to how we form groups, as Kevin mentioned earlier, if we're going to do some type of group competition, make sure they're not static groups, make sure we're changing the groups between different elements of competition. But the cooperative learning is really facilitated for mastery goals. Beyond, the grouping is better than individual competition, definitely. But being aware of how we group and how we are encouraging that grouping is important. Mm-hmm. So that is G. Got E.
So E's evaluation. And we already talked about this too, that it's kind of similar to this recognition that evaluation, what you really want to avoid is this, public kinds of evaluation. So I want to bring this up in class, like in our in-person class. I always have some students share some horror story of, I was in 5th grade and the teacher who made us stand up, and then he'd read off the test scores and we had to sit down, and the person with the lowest score was the last remaining one. Like some of these crazy things, like, wait, no, that didn't really happen. Oh, that happened to me, and I've hated math ever since. And but those, the valuations, should, try to tie into emphasizing that learning and improvement. So whether that's grading based on personal improvement or certain standards and work and progress and achievement towards those standards, we should try to do that more. So, all right, final one, T. Time.
The final T is time. Yes. So time kind of has a couple of different elements to it, thinking about how much time commitment and how much time we need to be, spending with certain goals. Additionally, considering that we have goals that kind of work at different time levels. So is this a goal that we're making for a unit? Is this a goal that we're making for today or for this week? And so the time element of being, considering what level of organization of time is this goal referring to, but also making sure that we provide enough time for students to be able to complete the goals that they have, and be able to, if we're encouraging mastery goals, recognizing that sometimes it takes a while to master a topic and do that type of deep learning that's going to encourage those mastery goals. So kind of that awareness of time and the awareness of, making sure that we're providing adequate amounts of time, I think is kind of the key element with the time there. So that is the target model.
And that's it for our blog, right?
And that's it for our blog. Yes. Except for our picture reveals.
Oh, yes. So Cassie, where are you?
So I am at James Peak. James Peak is kind of north of I-70 in Colorado. This is Colorado. think most of our pictures are probably going to be Colorado. But this is James Peak. This was in a winter hike that we did years ago. We did it years ago. And we didn't make it to the summit this day. It was fairly windy and cold, but later that same year in the summer, we made it to the top of James Peak. So that is where I'm coming to you from today. How about you, Kevin?
I am coming from the Weminuche Wilderness, so down in southern Colorado, like between Silverton and Durango, San Juan Mountain Range. And we went backpacking here over the summer. So it's in August. So here again, you can see the view. Beautiful spot.
Beautiful.
So, all right. Well, that's it for this vlog, and we will talk to you sometime in the future.
We'll see you next time. All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. I see my hand there.